Hi, Bookworm buddies. Welcome back for chapters 5 and 6 of the Boxcar Children. Chapter 5, The Explorers Find a Treasure. The next morning, Jessie woke up first, and she got up at once, for she was the housekeeper. The dog sat in the door of the car and looked at her as she jumped down to get the milk for breakfast, and then he jumped down after her. Jessie walked down by the little brook and stopped to look at the waterfall. It was beautiful. I must look in the refrigerator, she said with a laugh. It was a funny refrigerator. There was a rock behind the waterfall, and the night before, Jessie had put 2 bottles of milk in the hole in the rock. Now she took out the bottles and found that the milk was very cold. Is it good? Called Benny, who sat in the car door. It's delicious, said Jessie. It's cold, too. She got up into the car with the milk and sat down beside Benny, and the 4 children drank the milk for breakfast. Henry said, Today I'll go to town and try to find some work to do. I can cut grass or work in a garden sometimes, and we'll have something besides milk for breakfast. He washed his hands and face and started out. I'm so glad you have a dog, Jessie, he said. Goodbye, I'll be back at noon. The children looked after Henry, and then they looked at Jessie. What are we going to do now, Jessie? Benny asked his sister. Well, Benny, answered Jessie, we'll go exploring and looking for treasures. We'll begin here at the car and then look until we find a dump. What's a dump? Said Benny. Oh, Benny, said Violet, you know what a dump is. Old tin cans and old dishes and bottles. Are old tin cans and dishes treasures? Benny wanted to know. There'll be treasures for us, answered Jessie with a laugh. And wheels? Said Benny again. Will there be any wheels at the dump? Yes, maybe, said Violet, but cups, Benny, and plates and maybe spoons. You like to drink milk out of a cup. Oh, yes, agreed Benny politely, but anyone could see that his mind was still on the wheels. The explorers started down the walk of the old rusty tracks, with Watch hopping along on 3 legs. The other paw, still tied up in Jessie's handkerchief, was held off the ground. See? He's hopping along. But the dog looked very happy. He liked these kind children. They all walked along through the woods, looking this way and that, and after a while the old tracks came out into the sun, and the explorers found that they were on top of a hill. They looked down and see a town below them. Henry's down there, said Jessie. Benny walked along beside his 2 sisters, and suddenly he cried happily, Look, Jessie, there is a treasure, a wheel. The girls looked where he was pointing, and they saw a big dump with many old bottles and tin cans, and they also saw wheels and cups. Indeed, there were dishes of all kinds. Oh, Benny, you saw the treasures first, cried Jessie. What should we do without you? So see what they found? Violet ran over to the dump. Here's a white pitcher, Jessie, she called. Jessie looked at it. It was all right with only one small crack. And here's one big white cup, too, she said happily. Could you use a teapot, Jessie, said Benny. Yes, indeed, she replied. We can put the water in it. And I found 2 cups and a bowl. Let's look for spoons, too. Violet held up what she found, 5 spoons covered in rust. Good, said Jessie. Here's a big kettle. Let's put all the dishes in it. Then we can carry them back to the boxcar. Benny had found 4 wheels just alike and laid them to one side. Now he held up a pink cup. It had a big crack in it, but it had a handle. This will be my pink cup, said Benny. I hope it'll hold milk, said Jessie, laughing. It is a beautiful cup, Benny. The children laid all their treasures, even the wheels, on a board, and the girls carried the board back to the boxcar between them. They put the dishes down by the brook. Now we must wash them, said Jessie. All right, agreed Benny. We'll wash my pink cup. And never did a little boy hand dishes so carefully to his sisters as Benny did. The girls washed the dishes with soap, and Jessie used sand to get the rust off the spoons. There, she said, washing the last shining spoon. How fine they look. But I'm afraid they're still not clean enough to eat from. When Henry comes home, we'll get him to build a fire. Then we can use hot water to rinse them, and they will be very clean. The children sat back and admired the dishes. Suddenly Violet cried, Oh, I know where to put them. Come and see what I found in the car last night. Both girls looked in at the door. Look on the door on the other side of the car, said Violet. All Jessie saw were 2 pieces of wood nailed to a closed door, but she knew at once what Violet had in mind. She ran to get the board they had carried from the dump and laid it carefully across the 2 pieces of wood. It made a fine shelf for the dishes. There, said Jessie. The children could hardly wait to put the shining dishes on the shelf. Let's put them on now, said Violet, and let's see how they look without waiting to rinse them. When they were on the shelf, Violet picked some white and yellow flowers and put in a cup full of water in the middle of the shelf. There, said Jessie, stepping back to look. You said there 3 times, remarked Benny happily. So I did, replied Jessie, and I am going to say it again. She pointed into the woods and said, there. Henry was coming through the woods, and he carried many funny-looking bundles in his arms, but he wouldn't open his bundles or tell them what he was doing until it was time for dinner. Where did you get the dishes, he said, when he saw the shelf. We went exploring, said Violet, and found a big dump. The children began telling him all about their treasures. Benny told him about the tin cans and his pink cup and his wheels. Jessie took out a big kettle and asked him to build a fire. We want to use the dishes to eat from, she said, and it's hard to get them clean in cold water. So Henry made a small fire in an open place where it couldn't burn anything, and he put big stones all around it. We ought to have a fireplace, he remarked. Jessie cleaned the kettle with sand and filled it with water. Then Henry put on the fire. Soon the water was boiling, and Jessie rinsed the dishes carefully. Now I know they're clean enough to eat from, she said happily. Chapter 6, A Strange Noise in the Night. At last it was dinner time, and the children sat down to see what Henry had in his bundles. I bought another loaf of brown bread at the store, he said, and some more milk. And I also bought some dried meat because we can eat it with our hands. And I bought a bone for Watch. Watch looked hungrily at the bone and laid down at once to eat it. Jessie got out 4 cups and bowls and put some milk in each one. Then the children put little pieces of brown bread in them and began to eat it with their new spoons. What fun, said Jessie, eating with spoons. Now tell us what you did in town today, Henry. Henry began. The town below this hill is Silver City. I saw the name on a sign. I went into town and walked along the first street I came to. It was a nice street with big houses and flowers and trees. I saw a man out cutting his grass. He was a good man, too, I can tell you. He was a doctor. Did you work for him, said Jessie. Yes, said Henry. He was very hot. And just as I came to the house, his bell rang. He started to the house, and I called after him and asked if I could cut the grass. He said, yes, I wish you would. You see, he wasn't used to cutting it himself. So I cut the grass, and he said, good for you. Do you want to work every day? And he said he'd never had a boy who cut it as well as I did. Oh, Henry, said Jessie and Violet. I told him I did want to work, and he told me to come back this afternoon. He has a pretty house and a garage and a big vegetable garden, and he has lots of cherry trees behind the house. He has a cherry orchard. You should see these big, beautiful red cherries. Well, when I was cutting the grass near the kitchen, the cook came to the kitchen door and watched me. She asked if I liked cookies. I said I did, and she gave me one. What did you do with it? Asked Benny. When she went back in the kitchen, I put it in my pocket, said Henry, laughing. Did she see you? Said Jessie. No, said Henry. I played like I was eating it. For a long time, I carefully ate away at nothing at all. Benny began looking at Henry's pocket. It did look very funny. Henry went on. When I came home, the doctor gave me $1, and the cook gave me this bag. Henry laughed at Benny and pulled the bag out of his pocket. There were 10 delicious brown cookies. Said Benny. Please, Jessie, let's have cookies for dinner. Yes, indeed, said Jessie. Then Henry opened up his last bundle. I thought we ought to have a tablecloth, he said, so I got one at the store, but it wasn't hemmed. Violet begged, oh, let me hem it. She took her scissors out of her work bag and cut the 2 ends even. But before she could begin to hem the pretty blue tablecloth, she helped Jessie wash and rinse the dishes and put them away. Benny helped too. And when Henry said goodbye, he went back to town, and all the children were working happily. So you see, Benny's working happily. Watch was trying to make a hole with one paw to bury his bone in. I'll help you bury your bone, Watch, said Benny. Oh, no, Benny, said Jessie. Watch wants to bury his bone himself. You come help me. I'm going to make a broom for the little house. For a little while, Benny ran around finding sticks for the broom. But soon he went to sleep on the ground with a dog for a pillow. The 2 girls sat by the brook. Violet was hemming the blue tablecloth, and Jessie was making a broom with a long stick for a handle. When Henry came back at supper time, the broom with its long handle stood in the kitchen, and a new tablecloth was hemmed. Henry admired the broom and the tablecloth, and he gave Jessie a small bundle. Oh, butter! Cried Jessie, her eyes shining. It was butter, yellow and sweet. The 4 children had not had any butter for many days. At last they sat down to their fine supper. Now this spoon is a magic spoon, said Henry. Turn it around and use the handle, and it's a knife. He showed Benny how to put butter on his brown bread with his magic knife. With dried meat, bread and butter, milk and cookies, the children could not have asked for a better supper. What did you do this afternoon, Henry? Asked Jessie. Well, I washed the doctor's car, said Henry, and then I washed the walk and the windows. Tomorrow I'm going to work in the garden. Then he looked at the brook. Oh, how I'd love to have a swim in that nice cold water. Henry was hot and sticky as he looked at the waterfall. Maybe we could make a swimming pool, he said. We could build a dam out of logs. Oh, yes, we could, said Jessie. Violet and I know where to find some logs and some big, flat stones. You do, said Henry. Yes, said Jessie. They're not far away, just a little ways below in a pool now with sand all around it. But it's not big enough to swim in. Is that so? Said Henry. One day I'll stay home and we'll try to dam up the brook and make a swimming pool. You can have my wheels, said Benny. Good, replied Henry. I'll make you a little cart with the wheels, Benny, and you can carry stones on it. Yes, said Benny, I will. Come on, we must go to bed, said Jessie. The children were all glad to go to bed. They stood on the stump and climbed into their new house, and they all went to sleep, all but Henry. He was thinking about the new swimming pool, and all at once he saw that Watch was not asleep. Henry patted the dog and said, Lie down, Watch. But Watch did not lay down. He began to growl softly. Shh, said Henry to the dog. He sat up. Jessie sat up. What is it, Henry? She whispered. I don't know, replied Henry, but he felt frightened. I think Watch hears something in the woods. Let's close the door, said Jessie. I'm afraid. The two children closed the heavy door softly, and then they sat still listening, but they never heard anything. Lie down, Watch, said Jessie. Go to sleep. But Watch did not go to sleep. He growled again. Maybe someone is in the woods. Maybe someone wants to hide in this car, said Jessie. Maybe, said Henry. There is something out there that the dog does not like. And then he heard a stick crack, and Watch barked. Oh, shh! Jessie put her hand over his mouth. If there's someone out in the woods, he knows there's a dog in this boxcar, said Henry. He took the new broom in his hands and waited. But nothing came, nothing at all. The two children waited and waited. Violet and Benny slept through it all. I'm going to open the door now, whispered Henry. They opened the door softly and then listened. The dog sniffed a little, and then he turned around 3 times and laid down. He put his head on his paws. It must be all right now, said Henry. Watch knows. Maybe it was just a rabbit. So at last they all went to sleep and slept until morning. All right, friends. Come back tomorrow for 2 more chapters. Until then, see ya!